Right, yeah, so my name is Juliette. And just in case anyone's confused, that's not Jaime. Jaime is in the auditorium and he's also got an awesome talk. So if you're in any way confused and thinking this might be too technical, Jaime's got an awesome talk as well. Now's your chance to leave if you still want to. So, who here is a developer? Oh, the majority. That is nice. That doesn't always happen to me when I give a talk like this. Who here normally doesn't work with code? Okay. Oh, you're making my life so easy. Normally I have to do a whole caveat about, if you're a plugin installer and selector, then this can still be useful for you. But, I don't have to do that now if you're all working with code. So let's dive in. WordPress CS. Basically, there are coding standards for WordPress. That's in the handbook. It's a written set of rules. And some of that might be arbitrary. Some of it makes actually really good sense. But before anyone gets confused, WordPress CS does not mean code style. It includes code style, but it's far more than that. It's coding standards. It's best practices, it's quality assurance. More than just code style. So when you look at code, you need to look at so many different things when you review code. When you get a feature request or when you get a pull request with a change, a bug fix, there's so many things you need to pay attention to. So many different things to take into account. Is this something we want in our code base? Is it architected in the right way? Does it belong in this code base or in another code base which is related? There's so many things you need to look at. It's really, really, really easy to overlook something. So think of the codified WordPress Coding Standards, which is a package you can use in your daily life, as a little robot which looks over your shoulder and hopefully finds a lot of those things you might otherwise overlook. Does that make sense? How many of you already use the coding standards? Wow. Ooh, I'm in my home crowd now. Right, let's see how well you've actually paid attention to the coding standards. Because if you get a code snippet like this and you review it, what's wrong with it?
Translation. Missing.
Where?
Around the string.
There's nothing translatable there.
URL is not escaped.
URL's not escaped. Ding, ding, ding. What else?
Trailing commas after the third.
Ding, ding, ding. Right, so we have the URL which is not escaped, and we have a trailing comma, which is PHP 7.3 plus. If your code needs to be cross-version compatible, this is going to be a parse error. And it's so incredibly easy to overlook this. Should we do another one?
Yeah.
Right, a bit more complex.
Can be that's not available. The B phrase it's not it will be an error because it's not it can be undefined.
Okay, so the post phrase may not exist. There's no validation being done, no check with is set whether that actually exists. Very well done.
Nonce verification.
There's no nonce verification being done, also very well done. If you don't do nonce verification, you do not know whether the post or you get comes from your form, and that opens you up to cross-site request for forgeries, which is a security risk. It's not sanitized. Which bit? The one at the bottom is not sanitized before, it's not output escaped before it's printed again, and at the top it's not sanitized before we're actually checking the value.
Now it's not translated.
Correct? I did say there was more wrong with this one. Should we go through all of it? Okay, so first, we don't know where the post exists. That was already mentioned. Next, okay, so WordPress slashes everything it receives from post and request and get. If you compare the post phrase with "it's a brand new day" without unslashing it, this is never, ever, ever, ever gonna match. So this code is absolute nonsense if you don't sanitize and unslash the post phrase. On top of that, we're doing a loose comparison against false, but string position might return integer 0. So this loose comparison, again, is absolute crap, because if the phrase is "it's a brand new day," it's literally that phrase, or it starts with that, this is going to give you the wrong answer. So, as I said, there's a lot wrong with this code. What's more, yes, we're escaping the congratulations and wrong answer phrases, but we're not translating them. Because HTML just escaped, it doesn't translate. We need HTML with underscores to translate it as well. But we're passing the domain, so we're actually saying we want it translated, except we're not doing it. Then, again, the output escaping for the phrase there. So, yes, it's really easy to overlook something when you review code. Shall we continue and do another one? Right. I'll keep going.
Text domain has to be string.
Screen icon is deprecated.
Screen icon is deprecated, and I heard something here at the front. No?
Text domain has to be a string.
Sorry?
Text domain has to be a string.
Text domain has to be a string, definitely.
Shorthand PHP opening is not always supported in all hosting environments.
No, but a good point, but not completely correct. But there is something wrong there. I'll come back to that.
There is no closing key.
Sorry, I'm getting two answers at the same time. What were you saying?
There is no closing key.
There's no?
Closing key.
There's no closing if. Yeah, the thing is, this is the header, so there might be, the closing might be in a footer function, so that may not be wrong. But it is something to check when you review, absolutely. But it's something to check manually. And you were saying?
It's not sanitized, the underscore E.
It's not sanitized? Yeah, so... Sorry? Come again?
My admin page.
My admin page is not translated. I'm still missing one of the most important ones.
It's not a H1.
It's not an H1. That is, I mean, that is arbitrary. Maybe there is an H1 in another function above it, and then the H2 is correct. That's something I cannot determine just by looking at the code. That needs a manual reviewer. But there is still one thing which is really wrong with this.
It's not documented.
It's not documented. Completely correct, except that's not what I'm looking for.
The widget is not closed.
Come again?
The widget tag is not closed.
Sorry.
The class wrap is not closed.
No, it doesn't check for that.
Shall I just go through the things which are wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, first thing. Now, if I highlight what's wrong, can anyone tell me what's wrong here?
It should have been namespaced.
It should have been either namespaced or prefixed. Anything you do in the global namespace should be namespaced or prefixed. Why? Very simple. With thousands and thousands of plugins and themes out there, it's so bloody easy for people to use the same name twice. So if you in a plugin use admin page header and someone in a team uses admin page header, you have a fatal error because the function is being defined twice. And that means the end user has a white screen of death. Do we want to give the end user a white screen of death? Nope. In that case, prefix everything. And for functions, for classes, if you namespace your code, you're fine. But not for variables. Namespacing has no effects on variables. Namespacing has no effect on text domains. Namespacing has no effect on filters. So for anything, when you define your own filter, which is going to be, a do action or apply filter, when you define variables, make sure you prefix those if they're in the global namespace. Yeah? Okay, the first thing which was mentioned, this was mentioned already at the back, screen icon is deprecated, so you shouldn't use it anymore. We have admin page, which is not translated. This is, by the way, something which we cannot detect automatically, because some hard-coded text strings are not being output to the screen, so we cannot determine whether something needs to be translated or not. The fact that you actually found this and saw this is a good thing, because yes, manual review is still necessary. This is only a robot which can help you. It cannot replace you. What else? Okay, we have the short echo tag. You already mentioned that. The thing with the short echo tag is, unless you're using PHP 5.3 or lower, there is no risk using it. I want to get rid of the rule forbidding it, because it's absolute total nonsense. Prior to PHP 5.4, there was an ini setting which would determine whether a short open echo tag would work or not. As that short open echo tag is now no longer subject to that ini setting, it's not a risk anymore, so you don't need to have the risk of code exposure that way. But there is still a problem here, because the _e function, on the one hand, is not escaping, which it should do. It is translating, but it's also echoing. And the short open echo tag also echoes. So now you get the content echoed out, plus an extra 1. Because the result of that echo out function being echoed out again is true, and that echoes out as 1. So now you have a stray 1 and you need to debug where the hell that 1 came from. Does that make sense? This is why automated checks can really help you. Right, text domain, Joost already mentioned that. That really should be a hard-coded string. There is a reason for that. There's a lot of different generators for PO files, the translation files, which can be used to make a plugin internationalized. If you submit to WordPress.org, that's all handled by Rosetta. But not everyone does that for commercial plugins or for plugins which are proprietary. You still want that the text strings to be translated, and the tooling for that can often not handle it if you don't use a hard-coded text string. It cannot distinguish which bits which bits it needs to extract from your code to say that belongs with this plugin to translate. So always make sure that's a hard-coded string. Yes, I know it's annoying because you don't want duplicate hard-coded strings, but it is what it is. One more? Yeah. One more. Okay, let's see.
No label date prepared. It's not a prepared statement.
It's not a prepared statement. Ding, ding, ding.
Doesn't mean that the globals are available yet.
Sorry.
It doesn't mean that the globals are already initialized, the WP and the $ID.
Actually, if you import them with global, if I remember correctly, they will always be available. It is correct what you're saying, that WPDB might not be the object.
Then you have to be sure that it's initialized after the WPDB is already there.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is, okay, the global statement imports the variables, but those variables may not have been initialized by WordPress yet, so we need to check that they are actually available with the right content before we start using them. Good point. In most cases, if you use the normal WordPress flow, these will be available. So these are low risk, but it is a very good thing to always check that when you hook into WordPress, you hook in at the right place. Because if you hook in too early, then you have that risk. Very good point.
Search is not a fallback if not inputted.
Search doesn't have a fallback?
If it doesn't exist.
Okay, what would that mean for the code? If search doesn't exist?
If it exists, return.
Basically, you wouldn't have a result, and we're going into the for each without checking that the result is actually an array, that it's iterable.
Also searching for the string search and not the value given to the function.
Searching for the string search, not the value given to the variable, you're saying? Actually, it's a double quoted string, so that's not true. This will be interpolated.
SQL injection.
But it is subject to SQL injection. That's when we come back to the first person who mentioned prepared statements.
In the for each, ID is being overwritten by the for each.
Ding, ding, ding. And there we have it. Well, there's one more, but we're nearly there. Okay, so this is not a prepared statement. Why are prepared statements important? Do you all know that cartoon Bobby Tables? Okay, if you don't know it, look up XKCD on the internet, Bobby Tables. You are gonna laugh. Basically, anytime you query the database and you use a variable as input, you don't know what the content of that variable is. That variable might contain a string which is crafted in such a way that it damages your database. That's the Bobby Tables cartoon, where basically someone puts their child up for school and made a surname, semicolon, delete tables. And suddenly the school administration was gone. So anytime you use any arbitrary data in a query, in a database query, you need to prepare it. You need to make it safe for use in that query. That's not being done here, and that should be done. So the search there is really dangerous, but there's more wrong with that search, because we're doing a like with the search, except where a like says, okay, I want it to be like something, and something can be either in front of it or behind it or on both sides of it, except no, we're using the hard-coded search string. We're not actually telling the database that there can be something before it or after it, so we should have just used a straight comparison here. This like is absolutely useless. What else? The for each, we already mentioned that. We're not checking if we actually got a result back, if we got something iterable back. So before we go into the for each, so we may be for eaching on false, which is likely at some point in the future to return a PHP error. And we're overriding ID. And overriding ID is really, really dangerous, because it's a global variable defined by WordPress core. That means that WordPress core might break at any point after you've done this code, after you've run this code. Now WordPress code cannot rely on that variable it defined itself. Now any other plugin or team can no longer rely on that plugin, on that variable. Basically, you are breaking WordPress if you override any of the WordPress globals. Having seen these code samples, is anyone still unconvinced that coding standards and quality assurance in such a way has a value? Well, not everything I showed you can be caught by automated tooling, but a lot of it can be. And to do that, we have codified that handbook, the coding standards, into an automated tool. We call it WordPress CS. And there's a new version 3, just come out, and it does so much more than just checking code style. It has security checks, WordPress plugin and core interoperability checks. It checks if you're using deprecated functions from WordPress. If you add PHP compatibility WordPress to it, it can even check for PHP compatibility issues. So there's lots of different things that can check and help you with. There may be some rules you don't like. It's configurable. You can change things. So that's okay. So, how do you get WordPress CS? Considering most of you already use it, I think I can skip over this largely. Just very quickly, as of WordPress CS 3, the only way to install WordPress CS, the automated, the codified version, is via Composer. We no longer accept or support peer installs, cloned installs. You can still do it. It's still perfectly workable. I have a clone an install which is a clone on my local machine. but we do not offer support for it anymore because WordPress CS has grown, it's become more complex, and the amount of support, the amount of time it costs us to support non-Composer installs is just not really worth our time at some point. We make it as easy as possible, just install it with Composer. Again, I mentioned optionally the PHP compatibility WordPress standard, which is basically the PHP compatibility standard with some caveats for known polyfills which are in WordPress. As you can also see here, and okay, the little dot doesn't work on the screen. You can see Composer Global. That's optional. Generally, the recommended way of doing this is install it as a requirement in your project. But if you don't work with code, for the 1, 2, 3 people maybe here who are people who, for instance, select plugins, then it might be better to install it globally so you can use it whenever you're evaluating plugin and you don't have to add it to each plugin because that's not yours to do. Yeah? If you do install it as a global package with Composer, make sure that the Composer vendor bin, the global Composer vendor bin is in your Windows or your Linux path. That way you can just use PHP CS wherever you are on your computer. Doesn't matter. Okay. Normally I would do a little demo now showing how it works, but should I still do that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Let's have a look. Okay, so, oh, hang on. Why is this not going to, okay. Ha, no. This is going to be fun. That's not right. I need a much bigger command line. Because this is unreadable for all you all. Hang on. Settings. Oh, no. This is impossible for me to do. Sorry, normally I use a separate profile on my laptop for presenting, and there everything like this has been set up. But that doesn't work nicely with the command line. So I thought I'd cheat and use my normal profile. I shouldn't have done that. Right, let's set this to 20.
Make it 40. Make it 60.
Why did it not take anyway?
It's just not big enough.
Yeah, let's not. Okay, so can you all see the command line now? Yeah? Okay. So if I do PHP CS -I, it should say a whole list of standards. Normally when you do this, you will see maybe 1/3 of this list of standards. But as I develop this kind of shit, yeah, I have a little bit more. So this way you can see all the different standards which are available. And yes, I'm using PHP 8.3 already. Now to run it, normally you would use vendor bin PHP CS. I'm using PHP CS Global. I'm going to say I want to see progress. I want to see error codes. I want to run it on the complete project. I want a report which shows me the full report and a summary and the source report. And I want to run against the WordPress standard. Let's see what happens. Oh. Okay, I made a typo. Let's do a comma here instead of a dot. There we go. Ah, now something is happening. Ooh, yes. Nobody saw which project this was, did you?
We did, it's in the past.
Okay, this is a project which is old, which hasn't been updated that much recently, so maybe it needs a bit of love. Please forgive that project, and if you feel inclined, contribute to it, because it's on GitHub nowadays, recently. But yeah, you can see in everything I just showed you. Oh, let me just scroll up. If I can do that. Yes, you can see all the errors here. If there's a little cross here, that's something which is auto-fixable. That means that you can run a second command, PHP CBF code beautifier. And it will actually fix those things for you if you want to. Anything without that cross cannot be auto-fixed and needs manual attention. This is the full report where it gives you everything on each line for every file. Then we have a summary, it gives you how many errors and how many warnings are in each file. And then you get the source report. Why is the source report interesting? It gives you the error codes. And the error codes can be used to configure WordPress CS. You can say at some point, okay, it says something needs to be output escaped, but hang on, I actually did that a couple of lines above it. And I've verified this is correct. The sniff is just not intelligent enough yet to understand that. So I need to put an ignore annotation in place to tell PHP CS it can ignore that. To do that, it's best to use those error codes. So PHP CS will only and just and only ignore that bit which should be ignored and not anything else. So those error codes are important. They can also be used to configure what you want to check, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Right. Now let's make it a little bit easier on myself again. I can see what I'm doing now. Previously, WordPress CS3, which I presume most of you are still using. How many of you have upgraded to 3 yet? One person. How did you like upgrading to 3?
We had to, because we were working with PHP 8, and it didn't work with 2.x, didn't work with 8.
It did, as long as you silence deprecation notices.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But we liked it.
Okay. Okay, so it wasn't too hard to upgrade.
No.
Good. For those people who haven't upgraded yet, when you had WordPress CS3, which you all know, you would get PHP Code Sniffer, you would get the WordPress Coding Standards, and with Code Sniffer came a couple of standards, and with WordPress a couple more standards. And then you had to wire that together yourself. You had to add a plugin, to, for instance, for Composer, to make sure that PHP Code Sniffer knew where WordPress was installed. Or you had to tell it in another way where WordPress was installed. You also could optionally have the PHP compatibility rule sets there with PHP compatibility WordPress. But yeah, you had to do more yourself. Now, it took a long time for us to release WordPress CS3. Any of you have questions about that? Did any of you read the make post about the release? Okay, a few people did. I'll quickly reiterate why it took so long. We started with a refactor because things like, well, you saw me mention PHP compatibility a couple of times already. PHP compatibility and WordPress CS were using a lot of utility functions which were basically doing the same thing, which were not in PHP Code Sniffer, but they had to be maintained in multiple places now. So we thought that we can make that smarter. So we were refactoring the code to organize all those utility functions which make writing sniffs easier in a central place. So that refactor was going on. Additionally, in March 2020, we published a post with a proposal for rules for modern PHP. Because PHP has added a shitload of syntaxes over the years. And while some of it can't be used yet by WordPress, some of it could be used, and there were no rules in place how to format that, so code was becoming quite inconsistent regarding that. And at the same time, even if things can't be used by WordPress yet, you, when you write a proprietary plugin on PHP 8, can use that syntax. And you might still want some formatting rules to make sure your code stays consistent. So we basically were marching in front of the band, trying to put those rules in place, and finding all the rules and sometimes writing new sniffs to create those rules takes a while, takes time. And while we were doing that, PHP 7.4 came out, which added arrow functions, which, in case you don't know, actually is really, really complicated for PHP Code Sniffer to understand. And then PHP 8 hit. Which added something like 15 new syntaxes. And all of them had to be accounted for first in PHP Code Sniffer, then in that centralized utility repository we were creating, and then in all the sniffs. And while we were doing that, PHP 8.1, and 8.2 hit. So the amount of syntaxes PHP has added since PHP 7.4, 7.4, 8.0, 8.1, 8.2, those 4 versions have basically added more syntaxes than every single PHP version from 5.0 up to 7.3 together. And we had to account for all of it. Because if we didn't, you'd get false positives and false negatives. Because if we were looking for a global function, you check like, okay, is there no object operator before it? But hang on, PHP 8.0 introduced a null safe object operator. So every single place where we were checking, is this a global function or not, we would have to change that code to take the null safe object operator into account. And that's just one example. What about match? What about enums? So every single syntax caused new problems, and we had to review every sniff in detail to be able to make sure that there's no false positives and false negatives. And I'm not guaranteeing there won't be any. I mean, my imagination only reaches up to a certain point. People can write really, really creative code. Please, if you find something, report it and we'll try to work around it. But we've really made the best effort to figure out as much as we could to prevent false positives and false negatives. So, what do you get in WordPress CS3? You don't have to worry about installing WordPress with PHP Code Sniffer anymore. That will be done automatically with the Composer plugin. You get that utility layer, that extra layer of utility functions which we created for writing sniffs. You get a second package next to WordPress, which is called PHP CS Extra, which has a lot of what I tend to call the forgotten sniffs. The sniffs you didn't know you needed, but you do. And we're using a lot of those sniffs now in WordPress CS. For WordPress CS 3, I wrote, I think, 35 new sniffs. So that's pretty extensive. A lot of them, again, with fixers. In Extra, everything is documented. In WordPress, a lot of it is documented. So you can actually get command line documentation as well. I would highly recommend using PHP compatibility WordPress as well. That hasn't got the next version yet. We're still working on PHP compatibility 10, which has the same problem. Except that code space is still, well, about 4 times as large as WordPress CS. So it's a lot of work, and I'm trying. Please be patient. It's coming. Okay, if you upgrade or when you upgrade, I really, really highly recommend read the upgrade guides and read the changelog. The upgrade guide, just follow it step by step. It's extremely detailed. You probably only need to make 3-4 small changes, but it will make sure that you check everything which you could possibly need to change. Just go through it step by step. Those guides are available. I see a smirk here.
You know what I'm going to do.
You're going to upgrade and see what breaks, yes. Yes, I know what you're going to do. That's not the way, Joost.
And then break it and then go finish.
So when you do that, when you just upgrade and everything breaks, because it will, then you know where to look for the answers. Please do not open an issue until you've checked the changelog and the upgrading guide, because I will bloody close it straight away. I'm not joking. Don't waste our time. You see how much work has gone into this and how much work it's been to upgrade everything. So the pressure and the amount of stress that's caused us has been a lot. That means that, you know, if people don't even bother to read, yes, we will close issues quickly. Yeah, no offense meant, but the information is there, you just didn't read. Okay. Now, when you start using WordPress CS, I think all of you already have this, because nearly all of you are already using WordPress CS. You have a custom rule set generally. That's the recommended way of using it. You have a few basic settings saying, okay, we want to scan this part of the code base. We want to scan PHP. We want, you know, to use the WordPress standards. But there are a couple of things you should really configure, and this is something you really need to pay attention to. If you're already using it and you're not using these settings, I'm going to tell you, please add them as soon as you get back to the office, because they're really, really important. So, if you use PHP compatibility WordPress, tell it the minimum PHP version you are using and then a dash after it. Because otherwise PHP compatibility will not be able to give you the right results, because it doesn't know what versions of PHP your code needs to be compatible with. Along the same lines, tell WordPress CS what minimum WordPress version you want to be compatible with. Otherwise, we will not be able to warn you correctly about deprecated functions, or whether a new feature like the %i in prepared statements can be used. So add those options. The minimum WordPress version configuration setting is used by multiple sniffs. That's why we use it as a config setting. And it changed names in 3.0. So you might, if you do have it, you need to make sure that you change the name to the new 3.0 name, which is more consistent all around. Yes? Then we continue. You want to translate your text strings. So you need to tell WordPress CS what text domain your text strings should comply with, because otherwise we cannot verify that the text domain is actually correct. If we don't know what to look for, we can check it. Similarly, you need to prefix everything in the global namespace. I already explained to you why that's so important. When you prefix everything, tell WordPress CS what prefix you're using, and that can occasionally, especially with older code bases which are still migrating to be consistent, it can be multiple prefixes. So you can tell it, okay, we have a few which were used in originally, and now we're all migrating to one new name, new prefix for consistency. While you're doing that, you can have multiple. Preferably you only use one prefix. But you need to tell WordPress CS what prefix you're using, otherwise it doesn't know what to do. And with that you can just run it. So there's a last few pro tips before we finish. The explain command, basically if you run PHP CS with -e, E for explain, it will give you a list of all the sniffs included. And that can sometimes give you some information of, oh, hang on, but that's something I don't want. Like that whole thing about long arrays, let's use short arrays. Or, you know, Yoda conditions make my code really unreadable. Let's exclude that. You can do that. And you can quickly find out the name of the sniff to exclude by checking which sniffs are included. So -e can be used to explain, see all the sniffs which are included in the standard, and there's a lot of them in WordPress at the moment. Now the next one is, I already mentioned documentation. You can actually generate documentation on the command line for all the sniffs included in a standard. Or just for one sniff if you just want to see it for one sniff. And that documentation has a little explanation of what rule is being checked and code samples with this is valid code, this is invalid code. So it gives you more information of what is expected of you and how to fix something. And it can help you educate yourself to improve your code writing. Next one, quite often you might have a really big code base in which you're working with, 500 files, 2,000 files, and you've just been working in 3 files. When you want to check the code style of your changes, do you scan your whole code base? Start using filter git modified or filter git staged, and it will only check those files which are either modified and unstaged or modified and staged. It will make your scan so much quicker. You can also combine this with PHP code beautifier, so with cbf command to auto-fix, and it will just fix those files. Yes? Right. Now you've heard me say that how much work this has been. Open source software is not free. There is a huge, huge cost, and the cost is not with you. The cost is with the maintainers. The cost is in mental health. The cost is in work-life balance. The thing is, you are just not paying the price, the maintainers are. And one thing we've noticed with WordPress CS, the work has grown exponentially with how fast PHP is going. This is unsustainable the way it is for us. We need a way to fund this project. And I'm not asking you as individuals to do this. I'm asking you to go to your employer and make the case that they help fund open source projects. Not just WordPress CS, but there's a whole chain of dependencies you use. Hopefully you're using PHP Unit, you're using Composer, you're using PHP. If any of those projects would go away, your work life would become really, really difficult. So make the case to your employer that as part of good business practice, they should sponsor open source projects, including WordPress CS. For WordPress CS, we have an open collective. Keep an eye on the URL. I'll post the slides online in a minute if you want to look it up later. And I want to thank you for your attention.